About 2 years ago, I created a budget deck list for an old border Yawgmoth deck, and after building it, I had so much fun that I ended up making it a regular deck for myself in paper. Of course, I juiced it up with other cards in my collection, but retained its flavour from that video. That was until a few months later when Bolas's Citadel was printed into old border, and the deck went from fun graveyard things to a tuned and focused combo deck. Since then, it's evolved into a very different beast, and well worth talking about if you're looking to do something a little bit different from a normal Yawgmoth deck. So for the first time, I'm actually going to be revisiting a deck I've looked at before, so that we can see what the $200 old border Yawgmoth deck now looks like, with no budget concerns and pushing for as high a power as it can possibly go. The commander is obviously still Yawgmoth, Thran Physician, a 2/4 human cleric for 2 and 2 black that reads, Protection from humans, pay 1 life and sacrifice another creature, put a -1/-1 counter on up to 1 creature and draw a card, along with pay 2 black and discard a card to proliferate. He's a powerful sacrifice outlet and a card advantage engine, all rolled into one. Now a normal Yawgmoth combo deck is going to use his ability to put +1/+1 with counters on creatures to allow for infinite sacrifices to kill opponents with Blood Artist type effects. The creatures have Undying, so that the -1/-1 counter Yawgmoth uses can reset the Undying +1/+1 counter they have when they come back. But Undying is a modern mechanic, and so far has not been printed into old border. So instead I looked elsewhere for inspiration. The main win condition of the deck is to resolve Bolas's Citadel and storm out that turn. We use our creatures in Yawgmoth to dig past lands until we hit either a Doomsday or a Tutor to set up the top of our deck. Then we try to put some combination of Grey Merchant, a sacrifice outlet, and Mortuary on top of the deck to do infinite casts and murder the table. Like any good Doomsday, there are many combinations that we can put on top of the library, but we'll get into those a bit later. Outside of this combination, we also have Storm Kills with Aetherflux Reservoir and Tendrils of Agony, which both help us get back a life when working down with Bolas's Citadel, or to bait our counterspells before we cast Doomsday. Lastly, outside of our Doomsday and Storms, we have Helm of Obedience and Leyline of the Void, or Douthie Voidwalker, to combo mill out our opponents. We want Leyline and Douthie as Stax pieces, so having the Helm in the deck just gives us more outs. Now obviously this isn't going to be a CDH deck, since CDH is more of a meta format with specific decks. However, I've played this in CDH games and had fun with it. This video also isn't limited to what I actually have in paper. We're going to push this to the absolute limit, and at the end talk about some alternatives to some of the really pricey stuff. So let's get in the deck. Our first topic is sacrifice fodder for Yawgmoth. For that, we have Ornithopter, Phyrexian Walker, and Shield Sphere to act as effectively 1 life cycling effects, Nested Shambler, who gives us 2 bodies, Brood of Cockroaches, which come back to hand at end of turn, Undead Augur, who has some zombie synergy and draws us an extra card, Phyrexian Rager to give us 2 cards for the 3 mana, Priest of Gix, since it's essentially free if we have other things to play, Rotlung Reanimator, since it produces a second body when it dies, Sengir Autocrat, who makes 4 bodies, and Solemn Simulacrum for both the ramp and the extra card. This deck is designed to just burn through cards in life, so every creature we run is also just going to be sacrifice fodder. The main benefits of these ones in particular though, is that they each cycle very cheaply with Yawgmoth, or provide extra cards when they die, since we turn any of the tokens they make into cards as well. Since we are burning through life, we need ways to recover it, especially for when Bolas's Citadel is out. For that, we have Zulaport Cutthroat, Grey Merchant, Aetherflux Reservoir, Zuran Orb, and Tendrils of Agony. There isn't a lot here, and that's mostly dictated by the options we have in old border. Turns out most of the black Lifegain was added in the modern era, so this is what we have to make do with. Zulaport and Grey Merchant can be looped in our combo, Aetherflux and Tendrils are our win conditions, and Zuran Orb can help us get rid of our lands during the big storm turn. Yes, that's right. Once you cook off, you need to throw absolutely everything you have into your combo, and if that involves sacrificing all your lands for some extra life, it's well worth it. Next up, what mean deck wouldn't be complete without some Stax? Well, for that we have Winter Orb, since we run a lot of Artifact Ramp, Douthie Voidwalker and Leyline of the Void for some graveyard interaction, and Karn the Great Creator to really screw up our opponent's artifacts. If there is one part of the deck where you could push this even further, it would be here, with more stacks to further slow down our opponents to our level. The ones here are the ones I like to run, but another 4 or 5 pieces could make for a slower but more restrictive deck. Now, like any strong EDH deck, we need a lot of ramp and burst mana, so let's look at them separately. For burst mana, we have Jeweled Amulet, Lotus Bloom, Lotus Petal, Mana Vault, Grim Monolith, Phyrexian Altar, Blood Pet, Blood Vessel, Dark Ritual, and Lake of the Dead. For our traditional ramp, we then have Chrome Mox, which just saw a reprint at Old Border, Everflowing Chalice, Mana Crypt, Mox Diamond, Soul Talisman, Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Felwar Stone, Liquid Metal Torque, Mind Stone, Ornithopter of Paradise, and Solemn Simulacrum. All up, that's 11 ramp sources and 10 burst sources, which gives us the acceleration to hit that 6 mana as soon as possible. Outside of that, we also want to minimise the amount of land in the deck that will get in the way of the Citadel. In fact, we only run 28 lands in the deck for exactly that reason. The less lands we have, the less likely we are to stall out on the bowler's turn. On that topic, the lands we do have are Ancient Tomb, Bojuka Bog, Cabal Coffers, Lake of the Dead, Phyrexian Tower, Sheltered Valley, Strip Mine, Volrath Stronghold, and 20 swamps. We need a high density of swamps to make sure we can get our black mana, and the rest of the utility lands help in a variety of ways. Sadly, we don't have an Old Border Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth yet, but it's common enough that our opponents will often run it for us. Sheltered Valley is the only one that really stands out here, allowing us to get a few extra life points at the start of the game if it's in our opening hand. But what combo deck would be complete without the tutors? And we have a lot. Imperial Seal, Vampiric Tutor, Insidious Dreams, Profane Tutor, Demonic Tutor, Diabolic Intent, Cruel Tutor, Grim Tutor, and of course Doomsday, if you want to count that. Black has the best tutors, and most of them were originally printed in Old Border. These can help find whatever we need to win the game, be it our Citadel to get started, the mana to cast it, or a win condition once we start storming. In particular, Imperial Seal, Vampiric Tutor, Insidious Dreams, and Cruel Tutor actually put the card on top of the library, which is perfect when our Citadel starts rolling. When it comes to drawing cards, Yawgmoth is already going to be our main engine for doing that, but we have a couple of other effects just to help out. Dark Confidant, Casting of Bones, Necropotence, Phyrexian Arena, Read the Bones, and Scroll Rack to help refresh our hand. Necropotence in particular is really powerful with Citadel, since we can exile for just a single life and dig through our library much faster with it. Similarly, Scroll Rack can help us dump our hand if we have nothing going on, with the hope of hitting a tutor to shuffle it away. And of course, once Citadel is out, it can be used to get cards from our hand back on top of our library to be cast. Overall though, Yawgmoth is the main draw engine of the deck, so we just need to get our board ready before playing him out. That way, even if he's instantly removed, we can sacrifice in response to refill our hand. Keep that in mind, never play Yawgmoth out into an empty board. You always want to get some sort of value even if he's immediately answered. We're pretty removal light in this deck, mainly because Mono Black has trouble dealing with artifacts and enchantments. We have Bone Shredder, Feed the Swarm, Bone Shards, Dismember, and Gate to Phyrexia for our targeted removal, and Terrasari's Devastation, Living Death, and Grave Pact for board wipes. Yawgmoth is also going to act as a removal piece, as his counters will quickly kill off small creatures if you're sacrificing a lot. Grave Pact is great since we're sacrificing creatures to Yawgmoth. Just make sure to stack your triggers correctly so that Yawgmoth's durability doesn't fizzle. Now it's highly possible that our combo or value pieces get in the graveyard during the game, so we do need some ways to get them back. For that we have Phyrexian Reclamation and Animate Dead to get creatures, Junk Diver to get artifacts, such as the Citadel, and Yawgmoth Will to play anything out of our graveyard. Not only do these help us in setting up, but they can also act as counterspell or removal protection in the event we do get a Doomsday off and the opponents try to ruin us afterwards. So that covers what's in the deck, but we need to talk about how to control it. Obviously our first goal is to resolve Bolas' Citadel without playing a land drop in the same turn. While it is possible to get Citadel out and storm off after playing a land drop, the most risky time is right at the start. If you get multiple lands off the top early, there's a good chance we'll fail and stall out. Blue decks are going to be our Achilles heel here, since counterspell heavy games are always going to try and prevent our casting. However, we have a special card called Copper Gnomes that helps let us cheat our Citadel into play a bit cheaper, and it can get around counterspells. It will also really confuse your opponents because nobody ever plays this card, and if you don't need it, it's only 2 mana and can be sacrifice fodder for Yawgmoth. Once the Citadel is out, we need to keep casting spells off the top until we can get a tutor that puts a card on top of our library, such as Vampiric Tutor, or we hit either Doomsday or Insidious Dreams to stack our combo. As part of storming off, we'll probably need to draw through lands and spells that we don't want to cast. That means we'll often have a lot of cards in hand once we meet our tutor. And Insidious Dreams is actually the better choice over Doomsday in this case, since it won't lose us the game if the opponent interacts afterwards. So assuming that we can either discard 5 cards for Dreams or are forced to cast Doomsday, here are the options we have for putting cards on top. The first one is Grey Merchant, Carrion Feeder or Phyrexian Altar,
Mortuary, Lotus Bloom, and a Yawgmoth Will. This gives us an instant boost in life with the Grey Merchant, which should then allow us to cast Carrion Feeder or Phyrexian Altar for a sacrifice outlet. To complete the combo, we then drop a Mortuary so that when the Grey Merchant is sacrificed, it goes back on top and we can cast it again. In this situation, the minimum life we need to be on to cast Doomsday is 12, as we need 5 life to cast the Grey Merchant. Once the Grey Merchant hits though, even if we're at 1 life with the worst possible board, being that we only have a Bolus of Citadel and a Grey Merchant in play, we'll gain back 15 life in a 4-player game, which is enough to start looping it. The Lotus Bloom and the Yawgmoth Will is there to help if someone counters our spells or removes a piece before we start looping. Yawgmoth Will helps us get the piece back from the graveyard, and Lotus Bloom gives us extra mana to do that casting. Now the reason we need a sacrifice outlet for all these is that if we're using Yawgmoth, he wants to draw when we sacrifice, and we obviously don't want to be drawing from an empty library if we need to loop this, more than 3 times. Our next option is Zulaport Cutthroat or Aetherflux Reservoir, plus Carrion Feeder, Mortuary, and again Lotus Bloom and Yawgmoth Will for protection. This works in a similar way, but this time we sacrifice Carrion Feeder to itself, putting it back on top and recasting it. Each time we do this, we gain back the life we lose with Zulaport and drain our opponents. For a Doomsday, this requires a minimum of 16 life, as we need 7 life to cast out our combo pieces. Unlike the last combo, this one doesn't gain us life, so if we need to use the Lotus Bloom and Yawgmoth Will, we'll actually need about 21 life before we can cast the Doomsday if we truly wanted to play it safe. If we don't have another sacrifice outlet available, Yawgmoth can be used with one particular stack. For that, we need either Zulaport Cutthroat or Aetherflux Reservoir, then one of our 0-cost creatures such as Ornithopter, Phyrexian Walker, or Shield Sphere, and then Mortuary and again Mana Bloom and Yawgmoth Will for protection. This stack requires us to pay 6 life with Zulaport out, or 10 life with Aetherflux, with Yawgmoth, the creature, Mortuary, and Zulaport out. We can pay a life to sacrifice a creature with Yawgmoth, which we'll put back on top of our library with a trigger to draw, which then we draw it into our hand. Then we can play it for free again since it's 0 cost and continue the loop. Getting the kill either with Zulaport, draining our opponents each time we do this, or with Aetherflux as we gain life. With Doomsday, this will require a minimum of 16 life with the Zulaport method, or some more life for the Aetherflux version. So far, all these loops have required the card Mortuary, but we have one alternative loop if that gets exiled, thanks to the recent inclusion of Aetherflux Reservoir into Old Border. For that, we have Aetherflux Reservoir, Undying Beast, Carrion Feeder or Phyrexian Altar, and once again Lotus Bloom and Yawgmoth Will for protection. We can sacrifice the Undying Beast to put it back on top, and then recast it again. Since the Aetherflux gains more and more life as you cast more spells, it can easily cover the initial casting cost and be done over and over. With Doomsday, this requires a minimum of 18 life to do. Outside of these loops, if we're really in a jam of things being exiled, we can also just put the Helm and Leyline combo on the top, but then we need to have a couple of turns to actually get that off, so we need the extra cards on top of our library from Doomsday just to survive those turns. As stated earlier, the Doomsday line is riskier than Insidious Dreams, but Dreams has a card requirement, so you'll just have to go with whatever makes sense at the point you're tutoring. Bolus' Citadel is the only piece that is irreplaceable in the deck, so if it gets exiled, you'll be forced to rely on draining people out with either Grey Merchant or using the Helm and Leyline combo. And that covers everything here. I've been playing and working on this build for literally years now, and it's gone off and won several times in non-CDH games. At the CDH level, it's just a bit too slow and unable to protect itself, but it can certainly hold its own and threaten the board. From my own experiences, there is one card above all that will ruin this deck if it's played, and that is Cursed Totem. More than once I've been locked out by this artifact, and since it's an artifact, it's really hard to remove in mono black. We have Gate for Phyrexia, but outside that, the best we can really do is turn it into a creature with Karn and use a removal spell on it. On the enchantment side, Rest in Peace can also be a major pain, but at least now we have Feed the Swarm in Old Border to help deal with that. The deck has an answer to everything, but sometimes it requires a little bit of creative thinking. Now, I can't afford all the cards I put in this list today, so to finish it up, I'm just going to go over some of the substitutions I use to replace some of the truly expensive stuff. Mana Crypt, Grim Monolith, and Mox Diamond are all powerful ramp pieces, but since I personally don't have a copy of these, I instead run Everflowing Chalice, Springleaf Drum, and a Commander Sphere. These are obviously much worse ramp pieces, but they're the next best ones after what we already run. Despite seeing a reprint recently, Imperial Seal in Old Border is crazy expensive, but you can always replace it with the humble Diabolic Tutor like I have. It's not great, but at 4 mana we make do with what we can. The Old Border Dark Confidant was a special Judge promo from 2011 and is very pricey at this point. I instead have added the newly Old Border Skullclamp from Brothers War, because one broken card deserves another. Lastly, while I do actually have a Yawgmoth Will, it's also one of those cards that's really up there in price. Unfortunately, it doesn't really have an alternative since it does something Black isn't allowed to do anymore in the colour pie. I use it as combo protection and recursion, so I think the next best replacement is going to be something like Reanimate. However, that's obviously a lot more narrow. These substitutions bring the deck down from an eye-watering 3,500 to a more reasonable 1,500. Yet, it's still not going to be cheap, but when we're talking about pushing a deck as far as we can, this does tend to happen. Especially when we're working with a restriction like Old Border. But that's enough from me. What do you think of the choices I've made here? Feel free to leave a comment below because I do intend to continue playing and improving this deck over time. And hopefully as we get more cards into Old Border, this deck is going to get even better. That's all for now though, so thanks for watching and I'll talk to you again next time.